All right, and then we'll continue with Lauri Suurpää from Sibelius Academy.
There might actually be some need for describing my background, because I feel that when Nessa invited me, I was thought to be a kind of devil's advocate, because I come from a very different background from many of the speakers here, because I come from the traditional, conventional, Western classical music analysis, and that's what I do. And my research mainly concentrates on 18th and 19th century music, and in my publications I combine technical music analysis with other aspects like narrativity or 18th century rhetoric or romantic aesthetics and literary theory and so forth. And the last larger project I completed was a book on Schubert's Winterreise, the song cycle published last year by Indiana University Press, and currently I'm working on another book on Haydn's late orchestral and chamber music. So this will be definitely a change of topic and also of approach. And as might be appropriate for someone speaking from kind of old-fashioned perspective, I have handouts rather than slides. So there are two coming. But the main reason is that I have both musical examples and a score, and it's much more convenient to be able to have them side by side rather than being switching back and forth on a slide. So please, each of you make sure that you have both the score and the musical examples, because I'll be referring to both of those. Okay, I guess I can start even though you're still getting the handouts. In about halfway through one more thing actually, I forgot to mention. This isn't something I prepared for this conference, but rather for a conference in Ireland about a month ago, and the theme of the conference was salon music, which explains a couple of references to salons within this presentation.
I knew I'd seen you somewhere. I was at that same conference.
You were?
Yes.
Small world. Okay. In about halfway through Jane Austen's literary masterpiece Emma, published in 1816, the heroine of the novel Emma Woodhouse finally meets Frank Churchill, a young man who hasn't so far visited Highbury, Emma's home village. Austen describes the first meeting of the two young people as follows, and I quote, and the quotation is given in table 1 of your handout. So quote, "Their subjects in general were such as belongs to an opening acquaintance. On his side were the inquiries, was she a horsewoman, pleasant rides, pleasant walks, had they a large neighborhood, Highbury perhaps afforded society enough. There were several very pretty houses in and about it. Balls, had they balls? Was it a musical society?" End of quote. After his first quite formal inquiries, Frank Churchill immediately begins to ask whether there are balls and musical activity in the village. And indeed there are, Emma herself performing as a pianist and a singer. In the novel, balls play quite an important role in forming and molding the relationships among the book's characters, thus affecting the unfolding of the novel's plot. These features encountered in Austen's Emma highlight two aspects that will give a context for my interpretation of Mendelssohn's Song Without Words, Opus 38, number 6. And now please see table 2. The first interpretive context is the idea of social intercourse. As suggested by the song's nickname Duetto, which is incidentally by Mendelssohn himself, the work can be understood as a dialogue between two characters. In particular, as the piece's musical dialogue is between melodic ideas heard either in a high or in a low register, the work can be understood as a dialogue between a female and a male speaker. In Austen's novel, balls provided women and men an environment in which to socialize. Thus, the dialogue in Mendelssohn's Duetto, quite clearly a conversation between a female and a male speaker, fits well the social world of balls, as well as with salons more generally. The second of my interpretive contexts that Austen's novel highlights is the significance of narration and telling a story. In 18th century, the main linguistic counterpart of music had been rhetoric, which concentrates on the form of oration as well as the devices the orator can use to affect the hearer. That is, rhetoric concentrates on the mode of presentation. In the first half of the 19th century, by contrast, narration and telling a story emerged as important linguistic counterparts to music. Narration thus provides us with one historically justified analytical starting point. I will elucidate the musical narration of the duetto through an analytical reading concentrating on 5 musical aspects, which are ultimately seen to intertwine and form a unified whole. And these 5 aspects are shown in table 3 of your handout. The first one is that the 2 voices are interpreted, to use a term coined by Edward T. Cohn, as 2 virtual musical personas, which are in a dialogue with each other. Second, the song's form consists, both locally and globally, of form-functional segments suggesting initiating, medial, and concluding functions, which reflect different temporal phases in the musical narration. Third, some of the musical gestures are strongly declamatory and assume a thematic function in the sense defined by Robert S. Hatton, and enhance the impression of a speaking persona. Fourth, the work's metrical organization subtly features conflicting downbeats, which affect the piece's narrative closure. And fifth, the song's deep-level tonal structure provides a global framework within which to interpret the music's local events. Now please turn to the page to table 4, which just briefly shows a general background for the analytical examination. So the piece is in a ternary form with an extended coda at the end. And now let's move to the actual analysis. Social intercourse and narration are evident from the very beginning. The A1 section consists of 2 parallel periods, the first of which, in methods 2 to 9, is analyzed in example 1. Let us first hear these bars. But before listening to this performance, I'd like to say a word about this recording. Because of the numerous recordings of the duetto, we'll hear one that is probably closest to the performing tradition of the 19th century salons. This recording was made in 1930 by Ignaz Friedman, who was born in 1882. And Friedman was a student of Theodor Lesetitsky, who was born 1830. And Lesetitsky was arguably the most important Viennese piano teacher at the end of the 19th century. He was a student of Carl Czerny and studied piano in the same musical environment in which Mendelssohn composed his duetto. We can't, of course, know whether anything of the mid-19th century performing tradition is still audible in Friedman's play. But let's hear the opening of the duetto performed by Ignaz Friedman. The music moves in many ways in a steady manner, and please now look at example 1. First, the antecedent in measures 2 to 5 ends in a half cadence, while the consequent ends in a perfect authentic cadence. Second, both the antecedent and the consequent divide into basic and contrasting ideas and consist of 4-bar hypermeasures. Third, the period as a whole can be divided into initiating, medial, and concluding phases. The sense of dialogue is immediately conveyed by the registral difference between the antecedent and the consequent. The thematic material of the former occupies a high register, and that of the latter a low one. For the sake of easier reference, I will interpret the high thematic material as utterances of persona A, and the low those of persona B. However, the two personas are not in the same status, nor, as it were, equally sure of themselves. As the uppermost line in example 1 indicates, the comments of persona A can be understood as a question. It ends in a half cadence and a back-relating dominant, while the utterance of persona B functions as an answer. It ends in a perfect authentic cadence, securing a top voice category 1. The music's dynamic level, piano in the antecedent and mezzo forte in the consequent, further stresses the greater weight of the comment of persona B. From the narrative perspective, persona A's comment covers the period's initiating phase as well as the beginning of the medial, while persona B executes the end of the medial phase as well as the concluding one. Thus only persona B reaches the functional conclusion. This more resolute character of persona B can be also heard in the musical gestures. Now please see example 2. Measure 8 introduces a declamatory gesture, a repetition of an accented pitch A flat, which I have called figure alpha. As this figure prepares the arrival at the concluding category 1, and as it has the air of resolute declamation, it enhances persona B's certainty of his answer. The second period's antecedent in measures 10 to 13 follows that of the first period, but the consequent in measures 14 to 17 is different in one important respect. And now please see example 3. It immediately begins in the dominant key, then repeating the material of the earlier consequent almost note for note in this new key. From a narrative perspective, persona B again gives his answer to the question of persona A, this time formulating the answer slightly differently, transforming it into a new tonal environment. In spite of its phrase structural clarity, the formal organization of the A1 section is highly unusual in Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words. And now please see table 5. And this table only gives a rough picture, as there are several borderline cases of periods in Mendelssohn's songs. First, as shown in the column 1 of table 5, building the A1 section around a period was the most common way Mendelssohn began his Songs Without Words. But column 2 shows that the Duetto is the only song whose A1 section consists of 2 independent periods, only the latter of which is in the secondary key. In addition, as shown in column 3, in the vast majority of songs, the periods have the same basic idea both in the antecedent and in the consequent, while the Duetto is one of the only 2 songs where the antecedent and consequent have different basic ideas. Finally, as shown in column 4, the second period's consequent immediately starts in the new key. Thus, it is not modulatory, as the consequents are in all other periods that begin and end in different keys. All these unusual features can be seen to enhance the impression of a juxtaposition of 2 kinds of musical factors and a dialogue between 2 musical personas. That is, as the antecedent is heard twice in the same way, persona A keeps repeating her questions. The transposition of the consequent, by contrast, suggests that persona B's answer is expressed in a slightly different way in the 2 periods. And as the antecedent and consequent start with a different basic idea, persona B, the consequent, immediately starts to challenge the idea expressed by persona A, the antecedent. The A1 section's unusual formal outlines and tonal structure thus subtly enhance the impression of a gentle argument governing the song's beginning. With the onset of the B section in measures 18 to 32, the quality of the music changes drastically. From the perspective of the expression, the major mode bliss of the A1 section transforms into a tragic minor. At the same time, the dialogue gets more intense. At the B section's opening bars, the two personas exchange short comments, while at the section's final bars, the personas utter their comments simultaneously. Let us now hear the entire B section. Example 4 shows an analysis of the entire B section. The section divides into 3 segments, the first of which, in measures 18 to 21, consists phrase structurally of the continuation. Thus, significantly, the initiating function has been omitted and the fragmentation shortens the musical gestures. In other words, the intensified dialogue grows directly out of the preceding material as there is no new initiation. Also, the voice leading structure ties the onset of the B section to the preceding material. The opening sonority of the B section results of a 5 to 6 progression above an E flat prolonged from the A1 section. In other words, both the form and the voice leading suggest that the B section's intensified dialogue continues the more gentle argument presented earlier in the song. Moreover, the intensification brings along a tragic undertone. The stronger disagreement is obviously something neither persona A nor persona B enjoys. The B section's second segment, in measures 22 to 25, begins to repeat the consequent which was heard twice in the A1 section. Thus, one assumes that persona B is confirming his point, this time in the tragic F minor. But he seems unwilling or unable to reach a conclusion in the tragic minor. The concluding perfect authentic cadence is omitted, thus the assumed consequent is transformed into a fade consequent, to use William Kaplan's terminology. An upbeat to measure 26 begins the final segment of the B section, the retransition. From a narrative perspective, persona A can now be seen to return to persona B's unfinished business. Please see again example 4. The dominant of persona B's omitted cadence in measure 25 is prolonged until measure 27, where persona A has transformed it into a non-cadential 6/5 chord. This is resolved to an F minor chord, which no longer sounds like a stable element, however. Poetically, both personas A and B avoid establishing the tragic expression in a conclusive way. Persona B omits the expected F minor cadence, while persona A reaches an F minor chord within a sequential forward-looking figuration. The two personas thus seem to have a common goal: to escape from the tragic expression. In the remainder of the retransition, this goal seems to get closer as the music moves towards the tonic key and non-tragic expression. Moreover, starting from an upbeat to measure 30, the two personas make their utterances at the same time, their melodic lines fundamentally moving in parallel sixths. Poetically, the dawn of agreement that the shared willingness to avoid confirmed F minor signal is leading to a more clearly pronounced consensus. When studied in its entirety, the B section's tragic move to F minor occurs within a larger framework growing out of persona B's confirmative comment at the end of the A1 section. Please see for the last time example 4. The B section ends in a dominant 6/5 that still prolongs the dominant that persona B established in the second period of the A1 section. The F minor chord, in turn, is a contrapuntal sonority whose both outer voices are, as the beam notes in example 4 indicate, passing tones. So the F minor triad is not a deepest level harmonic entity. Likewise, its tragic expression turns out to be a passing emotion that is subordinate to the primary non-tragic affection. The fleeting tragic dialogue provides the song's personas with a route towards a shared agreement. The tentative union at the B section's end leads to a complete consensus at the A2 section. Now the two personas together execute, in a modified form, the confirmative consequent of the A1 section's period. Let us hear the entire A2 section. As example 5b indicates, the A2 section does not repeat the consequent as it was heard earlier, but rather expands it. The expansion becomes apparent in measures 34 to 35 when the two personas together attempt to reach a tonal closure, sounding the important declamatory figure alpha. But the expected perfect authentic cadence is omitted. Likewise, the concluding temporal function is transformed into medial. After the expansion, the personas together arrive at the concluding tonic in measure 39. The tonic concludes not only the A2 section, but the overall course of the entire piece as well. Now please see at the final musical example 6. We can understand the song's narrative as dividing into 3 phases, which align with the 3 formal sections. First, the introduction of the juxtaposition of the two personas' opinions in the A1 section, the initiating phase. Tonally, this phase juxtaposes tonic and dominant. Second, active disagreement in the B section, the medial phase. Tonally, this phase consists of a middle ground passing motion within the prolonged dominant. Third, agreement in the A2 section, the concluding phase. Tonally, we hear the second branch of the interrupted structure as well as the arrival at the concluding tonic of the urzas. Thus it seems that all tensions, both narrative and harmonic, are resolved at the end of the A2 section. Yet this is not quite the case, and please see table 6. Starting in measure 32, the metrical situation becomes complex. In each bar, the main beat seems to be shifted from the beginning of the bar, a position that follows the notated meter and that has governed so far, to the middle of the bar. Thus we encounter a situation that William Rothstein calls conflicting downbeats, of which one is the notated and the other implied by the music. If the performer decides to bring this conflict out in one way or another, there will be a subtle sense of metrical tension in the otherwise unproblematic tonal closure. Also, the coda, which starts in measure 39, challenges the sense that the music has reached a complete and satisfactory closure. Let us hear the coda. The last three bullets in Table 6 show three musical factors that question, in the coda, the finality of the preceding tonal closure. First, starting in measure 42, the music begins to repeat the thematic material of the consequent, which this time does not lead to a cadential conclusion, however. Second, figure alpha is heard in measures 44 to 48, but it has lost its declamatory and confirming quality, as well as its role as the governing thematic idea. Third, measure 43 regains the Kopfton C, a pitch that still sounds where the piece ends. So the closing function of scale degree 1 is subtly challenged. All this implies, in a hardly noticeable manner, that the affirmation in the A2 section might leave the situation more open than it may first seem. A narrative reading of Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words, like the one presented in this paper, is not fundamentally far removed from the way in which these pieces were received in Mendelssohn's time, even though the analytical methodology I have used, of course, departs from the 19th century musical vocabulary. As R. Larry Todd has shown, Mendelssohn and his sister Fanny played, in their youth, a game in which they gave titles and created texts for their piano miniatures. The poetic nature of Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words was also noted in the contemporary reviews. In 1834, August Kahler wrote about a set of 6 songs, saying that they, quote, are only to be played by those who have the desire and ability to grasp poetic states, end of quote. And closer to our topic today, Robert Schumann heard in the Duetto a dialogue between a female and a male character, writing that in the work, I quote, a pair of lovers converse, softly, intimately, and trustfully, end of quote. What my analysis might add to Schumann's view is that the conversation between the pairs of lovers, as Schumann calls personas A and B, also includes disagreement. But as with pairs of lovers in real life, a tender dispute, like the one heard in the Duetto, may be a sign of trust and warm feelings, not of anger and quarrel. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauri. We are going to definitely have a few questions or comments. Short, hopefully. Phil,
Sure.
you should have
No,
something.
I just need to say that it's good to see this kind of analysis being put to good use. You know, I just want to make an encouraging sound, because so often this is used, as Sue said yesterday, as embellishment. This kind of analysis, as a kind of not that you did it very expertly and with great virtuosity, but on the other hand, it did have a point.
Yeah.
And it went outside and beyond the music. So, you know, I just want to make an encouraging sound to that effect.
Yeah, and I have to say that I fully agree with you that doing analysis for the sake of doing analysis is not leading us very far. But doing analysis for answering subtle and interesting musical questions is of course worth
So
doing.
thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. And anyone else?
Can I have one short?
Yes.
It's just a question about the narrative. What happens in bars 33, 34, 35? I mean, the staccatos come in. We have not heard this material before, so it's like, whoa, something new is happening. So, narratively, musically, what's going on there with those?
So could you please repeat the bars?
33, 4, 35. No, 40. 43, 44, 45. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
40.
Yeah, so it's like there's something new, something's changed, something.
The position of the two personas in respect to each other is changing at this point, because it seems at the end of the A2 session, when we get to the closing cadence, it seems that in a sense the confirmative tone of the main speaker, persona B, has in a sense subsumed the comments of persona A.
So is it like
But
to
here-
make it light,
yeah.
to make it humorous?
It's
to,
backing off almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's
And,
like
and also
new
the,
musical.
There's new musical material.
there's new musical material which is challenging the kind of confirmative tone of the repeated note figure, which so far has been a kind of authority saying that this is the way things are. And with the staccato pitches, the sheer sound seems to challenge that perhaps you don't have a last word after all, but there's something which you can't have an effect on.
But then you have persona A and persona B, but then what's this 16th? What's it? Is it?
Well, I think one important thing is that when one thinks of musical narrative or programmatic aspects of musical or these kinds of approaches, you really can't hope to encounter for each individual musical detail, which is something that the earlier 20th century and very late 19th century musical writers tried to do. They thought that musical program and music, in a sense, move completely in parallel, and in whichever moment you stop one, you can find a complete counterpart in the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that here the new figuration is, if you want to interpret it from a narrative perspective, just a sign that something new is emerging, that new impulse is being brought into the musical discourse or so.
Yeah,
But you could have, sorry, you could have brought in other new material.
Yeah.
This particular new
Yeah,
material.
and one important thing, of course, is that it opens up a higher register. And that higher register is the register of persona A, which in a sense seems to be casting shadow over the finality of the agreement earlier.
Yeah. So in my narrative, I mean, whatever the 16s are doing throughout the piece, it's like the background, the settlement
Yeah,
for
sure.
two personas to have their dialogue. So I'm interested whether it's an impartial background or does it harmonically favor persona A or persona B, or just, I mean,
Mostly it's impartial, I would say, but there are moments like at the very end of the,
so it's just the background.
yeah, let's say, starting from around bar 28, they are more directly related to the higher of the two voices.
Okay.
Therefore, that might be a point where these accompaniment figures, they take their part or so a partial
That's
attitude to the two personas or whatever. But from here on, I think the interpretation, and this is important, becomes very much an interpretation. So we no longer are speaking about objective facts in the music, if there are such things. I think there aren't really. But even a kind of intersubjective readings of which we might easily agree, but we make interpretations which are subjective, and that's not to say that subjective interpretations are something we should be doing. I think we definitely should be doing them, but I don't want to give too strong an opinion on how I feel these things operate
That's
here.
convincing. Thank you.
Right.
Right. I'll save it for the break.
Yes, save it to the break. I need to say this, and I can do it because I'm a chair. Yes. So anyway, I have to answer this devil's advocate thing, actually, because it's sort of a thing of higher level importance. I think it's highly important that you are here, basically, because the whole network is about different perspectives to the music, because the music is the same for all of us. We all hear the same things, more or less. At least our hardware is the same. And with different theoretical constructions and so forth, being it whatever, basically, we might have molded this software in different directions, but nevertheless, the thing we are hearing is the same. And I strongly believe that it is highly important, strongly and highly, that we do hear as many perspectives as possible. This is what this network is all about. I would say so, yeah. And funny thing is that it seems to be much more easier to get someone from traditional Euroclassical tradition in here than an ethnomusicologist, which is fun. It's so, but just pointing that out. Yeah, but anyway, thank you, Lauri. Thank you, Lauri. Now what we are going to do, because only maximum 4 minutes.